Alright, good people. Here I am in Tres Pinos, going down Highway 25. I'm about 100 miles into this journey. Go see my old man who's ill. So I don't think I'm going to make it all the way down there tonight because I just don't have the energy. So I'm going to probably take 25 to 33 and then camp for the night in a hotel somewhere, I should say motel. Tres Pinos. Alrighty. On October 1st, I got a call from the hospital asking me for my permission to admit my father. My brother would later tell me that my dad had a UTI and, quote, collapsed senseless. He was released a couple of days later. He had been in and out of the hospital for months with a recurring infection. In mid-October, I called my sister to wish her a happy birthday. At that time, she said my father was scheduled to come home after spending 2 weeks in the ICU. This was the first I knew that he had been back in the hospital. As my brother told me, if we called you every time he went to the hospital, you'd be inundated with calls. My sister sounded overwhelmed. I said I would come on down to help. This gave me an excuse to take a long motorcycle ride. I only recently came to know that he had been diagnosed with cancer that had metastasized to his bones. I telephoned him. He told me that he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and the prognosis was that he had about 2 years. That was about 2 years ago. Coyote. As I grew up, I knew one thing for sure. My father could become very scary, very fast. Lost to memory is some percolating conflict between my mother and father that I only know existed because of its climax. At the time, my family lived on Meridian Street in Los Angeles. One evening, we were seated for dinner. My memory crystal clears as I recall my father stand up in a fit of rage, pick up the plate my mother had served him and throw it like a frisbee out of the dining room. It sailed through the living room and exploded near the front door, painting the corner with food and sending shards of brown and black speckled beige stoneware with a dark glazed rim onto the floor. I am from a time and circumstance in which many of my contemporaries tried, and seem to have failed, to mature into an idealized manhood that even at 53 years old I subconsciously hold in esteem. And thus it may be fitting that I will always be known as Little Manuel, as I was once known, and my father Big Manuel, as he was known. Well, we just finished up 25, so we're about to go on to 198 for 40 minutes and hit 33, I think. Alrighty. It's about 3 o'clock. Got a couple of hours on the road before I consider stopping. Alrighty, that's it. It seems to me that my father is of a generation and circumstance that produced a type of manhood I don't see anymore, a type of honor in the presence of an unexpressed, silent turbulence, like a gathering storm. My father escaped an unhappy, and by today's standards abusive, childhood and adolescence when he got drafted into the Army, just as Vietnam began. As I grew up, it was not uncommon to be surrounded by men who'd served in the military. Like my father, most may have never gone overseas or seen combat, but they were all pulled out of their own realities and put into circumstances not of their own choosing. My best friend at Meridian Street was a kid named Brian who lived directly across the street. His father, Stephen, was tall, good-looking, with a deep, masculine voice, who saw combat in Korea where he had taken a bayonet to the abdomen. At 4 or 5 years old, I recall standing in their house when Brian's mother, Janice, served Stephen a hamburger over the kitchen bar that was too tall to eat. His father took the palm of his hand and crushed the sandwich until it bled au jus, pancaking it into a consumable size. When I was 6 years old, my family moved from Meridian Street to a hill called Mount Washington in Los Angeles, where we bought a house. And from that point until I left for Marine Corps recruit training, the important events in my life were associated with a little, eccentric gray house on Pheasant Drive. Mount Washington was an eccentric place, isolated from reality and populated by eccentric people. For those growing up there, the isolation produced a population of bright, artistic, weird kids who were out of place almost everywhere they went. My best friends at that time were a family that lived close by. I clearly recall the day my sister and I met them. At dusk on a summer evening, an all-American girl came down the street. She was the oldest of 4, and her name was, and is, Leslie. Minutes later, the next oldest, her brother Jason, came running down. He was followed by the next in order, Josh, and finally the youngest, Jess. Their father was older than my father. He had served on a B-17 bomber during World War II as a machine gunner. His claim to fame was that he'd been credited with a 1/3 kill of a German fighter. Then there was my friend Gintides, the smartest kid of my youth who would go on to be valedictorian of my high school and went off to university at Harvard. His in-house father figure had served in the Air Force in Vietnam, where he helped load body bags for transport back to the States. The experience had an effect on him that never went away. One particular day in my late 40s, I'm not sure if it was Tuesday or Thursday of this week or that, I got old. I got fat, I lost my hair. My interest in life evaporated. As my eyesight started to dull, I began to see clearly the things in my life that have disappeared. 2 of those things are honor and valor. As my father lay dying, I missed the generation of men once ubiquitous in my life, now relics of a time past. I am informed by those, many of whom were not there, that the past is idealized, that nostalgia overpaints in tones of rosé the darkness of yesterday. But I remember a time when there were not shantytowns in major metropolitan areas, a time when the government didn't allow pharmaceutical companies to poison entire populations with opiates, a time when Main Street wasn't abandoned to die as Wall Street danced. I don't believe in the Panglossian fairy tale that all is for the best in the best of all possible worlds. I think that men like my father, and Stephen Cummings, and Dick Mahan, and Gene Sweet, Alex Volulis, David Silver, David Sanchez, Jim Somerville, Tom Wisenhunt, Don the Barber, and Mr. Lester the metal shop instructor, and all the other men I've known made this a better world. And without them, a hard rain is gonna fall. Extant dissidents contrary to fair name and high honor. Summer twilight invites late the noir of night. Delayed by evaporate light, still sound mute in taupe and gray, the dark-born omen at twilight on plain display. Paradise scorched preludes tempestual blackedness, chaperoned by macabre dance. Celebrate its charred sacrifice. Our warriors forged in times astray, virtue weaponized, vice decayed, sharpened in the warrior's way. In thy name, USA. Martial kith and kin, drum cadence echo, arousing bloodlusted battalions upon toxic thistles poisoning the rose of our grace. Seductive solicitations welcome, seditionists to destruction. Turn times black and spill. The song bleeds on.